session, so you guys might get a little notification. So hi everyone who's joined. My name's Nadia. I work for the Reactor in Sydney. So this is the second panel of our Thought Leadership series, and we're looking at the future of education. So we've got some really great speakers today. I just wanted to go over a couple of housekeeping. As Shiva mentioned, we are recording the session. We've also got the chat box as well if you want to ask questions throughout. There'll also be an opportunity to jump in and come on audio as well to ask the questions to your panelists. So without further ado, I want to hand you over to Tiffany, who'll be moderating this session today. Thanks, Tiffany.
Great, thanks so much, Nadia. I really want to start the session today with a welcome to country. So I want to acknowledge this is a country in which the members and elders of the local Aboriginal communities have been custodians for many centuries, and on which these people have performed age-old ceremonies. The traditional owners of the land I stand on here today, and in fact that I am raising my family on, are the Gadigal and Wongal peoples of the Eora Nation. I want to recognise their continuing connection to land, water and culture, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. So with that, we might, to kick off the panel, we might just go to each of the panel members and get them to introduce themselves. So I'll start with you, Laurence.
Hi, afternoon everyone. My name is Laurence. I'm the director for AI industry innovation over in AI Singapore. Hope you can hear me. My background, I'm actually a mechanical engineer, but doing AI now. I've been doing AI actually for the last 30 years. Technopreneur, multiple exits. My last exit was actually with Revolution Analytics, which was coincidentally acquired by Microsoft back in 2015. And after that, I joined AI Singapore, and I've also been invited to be a Microsoft regional director, and I just started my second term with this program. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Laurence. I'll throw to you next, Kate.
Hi everyone, I'm Kate Carruthers. I'm the Chief Data and Insights Officer at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia. I've had a diverse IT background, and now I'm in the area of data and also cybersecurity, because once you start to put your data in the cloud, the very next thing that starts to worry you is cybersecurity. And I'm a recently appointed Microsoft Regional Director, which has really been a fascinating journey.
Thanks so much, Kate. And then last but not least, David.
Hi, I'm David Goad, and I have a few jobs. I'm a lecturer in digital innovation and digital strategy for the Australian Graduate School of Management over at UNSW. I teach similar courses for the University of Sydney, but I'm also the Chief Solution Architect for the Automation and Innovation Hub at the University of Sydney, where I am busily putting in new technologies to support online learning, and I'm also a Microsoft Regional Director.
Thank you so much. So as you can all hear, we have some very fantastic minds here today to share their thoughts, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion. So I may just sort of crouch this a little bit, to start with. I think as everybody on this call would be somewhat painfully aware, this has certainly been a year like no other. And without sort of downplaying, the challenges and the pain and really the difficulties for lots of people, right across our communities. From an education industry perspective, we really have seen a tremendous response throughout this period. The ability, I don't think anybody would have envisaged that, education would have moved with such agility and, to really address, the rapidly changing circumstances as they came about, and really to ensure that continuity of teaching and learning and student services. So I actually will just start by saying congratulations to all of you in the education sector for the job that you have done, because it really has been tremendous. Of course, this is far from over, and we see, a lot of challenges that will continue for the education sector, and our responses sort of continue to evolve. There's a lot still to solve for. Universities are finding their way in a new fiscal environment, and all educators are looking at the shifts that COVID has brought about and starting to think about what this, sort of next iteration of education will look like. We've seen lots of legislation, passed recently, and discussion of other legislation being proposed, and the role of the universities and how they operate is garnering a lot of attention. How courses and research are funded, the role of a university, say versus TAFE, their role in producing job-ready students, and how they partner with industry. From a K-12 perspective, how do we build skills in students that prepares them for success regardless of what track they take after school? How do we get more girls and Indigenous students into STEM-related learning earlier? And how do we build that notion from an early age that there's a need for lifelong learning? It doesn't just stop after school, or it doesn't just stop after university, but in fact, it's really a lifelong journey, for communities and society to flourish. But I think, with all of the noise that's out there, I think what's really obvious is that, the education sector is being viewed as an extremely important contributor to getting not the Australian economy, but all economies back on track. And so, as I say, really looking forward to this discussion. I think, there's plenty to talk about. And, I guess the first question I have for you all is that, in this context where, everything is suddenly changing in an industry that, in some respects had not changed for centuries. And now we're seeing, significant disruption. What are the areas that you are seeing in your region that are the biggest disruptors, and that's been accelerated by the global pandemic? And maybe we'll start by throwing to you, David.
Sorry. So what are you? So the question is, what do I see as being the biggest disruptors?
Yeah, what are the different forms of disruption that you're seeing that is particularly pertinent, that has been accelerated by the global pandemic?
Yeah, so I think my logic and the way I see the process going is kind of like this, right? Obviously, we've all been forced to shift to online, and as I say, as all the universities have moved to like a more of a digital online process, as Warren Buffett used to say, it's only when the water goes out that you see whether people are swimming naked. It's interesting to see all the universities, how they've been shifting to try to move to online. And to be honest with you, I think a lot of them have been struggling. But I think for me, the interesting impact of that move to online is I don't think we're going to shift fully back from that. That's the first one, right? That I think they were going to continue to be heavily reliant on technology to deliver education, right? Even if the pandemic clears up in the next 6 to 12 months, which it probably won't, but even if it does, I think a lot of the education will remain online. And the second thing is, if technology is becoming such a big part of the education space, that opens it up for non-education providers who are more technology specialists to come in and disrupt that market, right? And so I think that over the course of time, you're going to start seeing non-traditional providers, offering more course content. You see that in terms of Microsoft doing that. In fact, the federal government in Australia is actively encouraging it. So they're going out to non-traditional providers and asking them to start producing content. So to me, I think that's the way the disruption is going. We're becoming more reliant on technology, and because we're becoming more reliant on technology, you're going to see more non-traditional players coming into the market.
Yeah, thank you. And Kate, what are your thoughts on that?
What David said, and I think a corollary to that is that we are seeing people are not on an even digital playing field. So there's winners and losers from that. So we're seeing sort of bifurcation of access I've seen that in particular with some students in India. So I have an academic appointment in the School of Computer Science and Engineering at UNSW, and they have appalling internet, and these students have to get up at 4 a.m. so that they can listen to the class videos. So, you know, that's just not the case for other people in other jurisdictions. So that's one thing that I think is this bifurcation. And we're going to need, I think the thing that David said about who's swimming with no clothes on, we really need to start to rethink our pedagogy and our approaches to how we teach. And I know a lot of people are thinking about it, but a lot of people still want to just stand in front of a whiteboard and talk to a PowerPoint. And that just will not cut it in the digital context. It's just no way to teach in that context for the future. Yeah, but certainly both of those issues that you've raised, you know, in terms of equity, you know, we're seeing that everywhere, and I think, you know, from what I've heard, it's not necessarily just students who are in, you know, remote places, you know, in India, for example. You know, we've even heard the same for students in regional parts of Australia, that that's also been a real challenge for them. And Laurence, what about from a Singapore perspective? You know, what are the, you know, what are you seeing there? Is it very similar to what we're seeing in Australia, or are you also seeing some differences?
I think we are definitely closer to Australia than India. Singapore broadband is pretty pervasive. There is still a small number of students that may not have a laptop or PC access from home. And during this period, what the schools have done is to open up those schools and allow those kids that do not have a computer at home to actually go to school to get the education they need. But those that can actually stay at home. So, you know, broadband technology-wise, I think in Singapore is not too much of a problem. But on what was mentioned on the pedagogy, you know, I'm not a traditional academic. I don't come from an academic background. AI Singapore, you know, my role is really about enabling industry to do AI. But along the way, we had to create educational programs to enable the industry. But so I get to work with a couple of schools, and what we have also seen is that the last couple of years, several institutions in Singapore have tried what is known as the flipped classroom, where you don't really have the lecturer go through a set of PowerPoints, but rather they tell the students, please go back and read this, and when you come back, let's discuss and walk through some scenarios and so on and so forth. So I think, you know, I agree with what David was saying, right? Even after this pandemic, there will be changes on how teaching will be delivered. If it's fully online, I think we're going to go towards more micro learning, especially for working professionals. So a big part of my student population are actually working professionals and not full-time students. And for them, micro learning is really the way to go rather than a traditional 40 minutes video or classroom setting environment. It's just not very conducive for professionals who actually finish 8 or 10 hours day and then come back and watch a video.
Yeah. And what about, I'm really interested, Laurence, in terms of the government response in Singapore. You know, I mentioned there's been a lot of focus from the government here in Australia to really look to education as building out, you know, the skills needed for the jobs of tomorrow. Has there been a similar response from the government in Singapore, and how are they approaching that?
The Singapore government has been pushing for skills upgrading, upskilling for several years now. I guess at least a decade or more. And with the pandemic, what has happened is that the government has actually, I don't know the exact figure, but they have put in a lot more money to get more people to reskill or upskill. So, you know, during this pandemic is also an opportunity to upskill people because they have lost their job. And one of the ways that the Singapore government try to use basically to solve this problem is basically tell the PMATs especially that have lost their jobs, you go for reskilling, we will pay you a stipend. So it gets them retrained, but at the same time they're not given free money. They have to work for their money, as in they have to study to get reskilled, and therefore they get a stipend. So it's sort of a very, in a way, it's a very carefully managed way of spending taxpayers' dollars to make sure that every dollar spent, there is an outcome. So in this case, it is getting someone retrained, reskilled for a future job that, hopefully he will be reskilled and doable in 3 months, 6 months, or a year, depending. Mm-hmm. So there is a lot of government funding into training. I think 2 years ago, every Singaporean was given like $500. During this pandemic, everyone was given another $1,000. You can basically use it on, a few thousand courses that has been approved by the government.
Okay. And so I'm really interested also to hear, I think now that we're, quite a way into to this, sort of situation, and I think, as I said before, the education organisations have really, adjusted incredibly well. What are you seeing though that are the I guess the ongoing challenges in or blockers in us really sort of shifting and taking the learnings that we've had, from throughout this period and applying them moving forward, so that this, I'm a big believer in silver linings, so that, we do come out of this, better and stronger and more agile. What do you think is sort of the real from that? And maybe Kate, I can start with you on this one.
Well, the thing that's happening in the higher education sector across Australia, and probably across the world, to be truthful, is a big disruption because, firstly, because of COVID and the reduction in revenue due to the lack of international students. And also the universities are downsizing. So there's a whole lot of disruption in inside of our business, and then we're still trying to deliver educational services to our students while changing our organisations really quite radically. And that's happening across the sector in Australia, and to colleagues that I speak to in the US, it's the same over there. And at the same time as that, our government funding structures are changing. So literally every part of our industry is shifting under our feet. So all the things that we understood how they were in the before times are now shifting. And that's a lot of change to deal with as an organisation and as a human being inside an organisation.
Yeah.
And the teachers are at the front line of that. They're the ones who are at the pointy end delivering services to their students, and they care about their students.
Great. And David or Laurence, do you have a comment on that?
I mean, I totally agree with Kate. I think the challenge, one is, academics, right? They're very, very smart people, but they're smart in specific things. So all of a sudden now, you're asking them to teach different courses because there's been layoffs and shuffling around, so they're having to teach stuff that they haven't taught before. And by the way, you're asking them to become really au fait with technologies that they're not familiar with, right? So there's a lot of change, definitely a lot of change going on. And unfortunately for the students, I think that they're going to end up suffering through it, right? As these academics get themselves used to figuring out how to, handle this new world that they're in, right? So.
And there is a question in the chat just asking, what's the feedback that you've been getting from your own students and from their experiences?
For me personally, I think it tends to be varied. What I've realized, as I said to you, because I was teaching online before COVID, I think my transition hasn't been as hard as maybe some other academics. So I think we've made the best of a bad situation in terms of the technology and the technological readiness from the university perspective and that kind of thing. I do notice, I think, over the last 6 months, however, there's a completely non-education reality going on. That is, I just think the students are getting more and more stressed. You know, they've been locked up at home. They've been dealing with, you know, so a lot of my students, because they're graduate level, they have families, they have jobs, they're doing all these different things. They're trying to deal with their kids at home. And I think what I've noticed over the last 6 to 12 months is people are just literally becoming grumpier, right? So whilst I think they've been really patient around the change and they recognize there was a lot of change going on, I think also I can see the stress starting to come out. So I think that the lockdowns, at least in Australia, dropping off, or of course next will be very much welcome, because I can see where people are becoming stressed.
Yeah. And Laurence, Kate, the same feedback from your students?
So before COVID, we only had one class that was done face-to-face, and that was like a 3 hours workshop. But with COVID, everything that went online, but the rest of my programs were actually already online. But we had one unique program we call the AI apprenticeship program that was really hands-on, and these people are full-time with us, 9 to 6 every day for 5 days, working on industry projects. Now, because of COVID, obviously, we couldn't get them into AI Singapore, and everything had to be done remotely. The good thing is that a lot of them were already very tech savvy, so we're using tools like all these remote tools and so on to basically try to create the same experience of working together 8 hours a day, sitting next to each other, but actually through a camera and so on and so forth. So it has been disruptive, but I think so far we have lost, not in terms of technical, no, it is still there. But what we have lost is that the students no longer interact as closely as a cohort. That camaraderie, that bonding is not as strong as what I've seen when we were all together in the same room previously.
Right. And Kate, I think you're about to.
Yeah, so I think students are finding the whole video thing really difficult. A lot of them, are not in their own study. They're sharing accommodation, and they find it really confronting to be asked to put their video on a lot of the time. And also there's the weird performative nature, because in real life you're not seeing yourself. And in every video platform, you can see yourself, so you become conscious of yourself. And I think that puts a lot of stress on people. And I've only just really worked that out from some conversations recently. And I think that is really exhausting for people, and particularly for engineering students, because engineering is a really packed discipline. It's a very intensive discipline, and to be doing that online all day is really tiring.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, actually, and one I hadn't considered before. So yeah, that's interesting, and I think we see that right throughout. I think they can get some video fatigue for a lot of people who are spending most of their days on these sorts of meetings. And so what are the, looking to the sort of the positives, I guess, what are the things that you are, seeing that has really, shifted throughout this time, and you've thought, what, these are the things that are actually working better than they did before. These are the things that, we don't want to lose and we want to incorporate, in the way we work moving forward. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that, and maybe Laurence, this time we can start with you.
I guess what we have seen happening is that with more people working from home, at least for my cohort of students, professionals, they save an hour from commuting, and all of a sudden we see a lot of them being able to complete assignments and exercises much quicker. So compared to last year, I'm seeing a faster completion rate of certain modules. So that's something I'm not sure whether this pace will be kept up after everybody goes back to work. Other than that, I think I say, my group of students are slightly different in the sense that they're either working professionals or they are full-time apprentices with us. And I don't really see any upside when we go back. When we go back, things will still be as before COVID, during COVID. Just that I hope to see more bonding happen physically. And I'm sure it's the same in Australia. I see a lot of you have your picnics out there and so on. Same for Singapore. We always like to go out and bond over meals and so on, which we can't do now. So I think hopefully with the loosening of some of these restrictions, that will happen. It's nothing to do with technology, but I think this is super important in building up that relationship among the students.
Okay. David, what about you?
Yeah. So I think it's an interesting, as I said to you previously, short term there will be disruption because as the education system gets used to this new mode of delivery. That being said, longer term, I think this is actually going to benefit the students a lot. And the simple reason is this. I'm in the University of Sydney, right? The value proposition of coming, or the University of New South Wales, the value proposition of coming to Australia for the weather and to live here, right? That drops away. So universities have to get really, really good at delivering good quality content and good quality material. And now they're competing globally because as a student, I can sit in Germany and I can sign up to a course in Germany, or I can sign up to a course in Sydney, or I can sign up to a course in Singapore, right? So instead of University of Sydney saying that they're competing with the University of New South Wales, now all of a sudden we're competing with the university in Singapore and the universities in the US. So I think longer term, the students are actually going to see A, more choice, and B, that for the universities to do well, they're going to have to up their game, right? It'll take a few years to get there, but I do think that they're going to see a better product as a result of all this.
Yeah. And Kate, what about from your perspective?
It's actually really funny because I wrote my master's thesis last year and I looked at technology in Australian higher education, and all the group of 8 are all doing exactly the same thing. So nobody's trying to differentiate. And we're all still doing the same thing. So I think there's real opportunities for someone to do something a bit different. And I'm not sure if it's going to be, micro-credentialing or online stuff, but everybody is just in a pack doing the same thing, and someone needs to think of something else. And I think to David's point that we're now competing on an international stage. I've got a friend who's in Sydney who's doing a course at New York University, because now she can. But the other thing is we've got courses where you need labs, so you need to physically still go into the campus. And we're doing it in socially distant ways on the campus now. But some people just need to go and crush concrete.
Okay, thank you. So look, we're getting a couple of questions from the audience. So I'll ask a question from Matthew. How do we think the education sector should respond if the vaccine is successful and COVID indeed vanishes in 6 months? And so fingers crossed, Matthew, I hope that this becomes a very prescient question. But I might just open that up to the panel, to whoever might have a comment on that.
How they should respond or how they will respond?
Well, could be either.
Well, I think the point I want to make is there's something else is going on as well, right? So traditionally, if we were teaching in person, we might have super big classrooms, but we'd have multiple different sections, right? Theoretically now, there's no limit to the class size in an online environment, right? And all of a sudden now all the universities are realizing, saying, hey, wait a minute, I don't have to invest in this bricks and mortar. I can have these super class sizes with one lecturer talking to thousands of people. So even regardless of whether that's a better user experience or not, or how they execute on it, or whether, as Kate says, they come up with something innovative, I suspect that a lot of them aren't going to want to move back to that old methodology because they're actually realizing that this is actually more cost effective. You know what I mean? So online is a more cost-effective model for the university, not necessarily for a lecturer. I actually find it more work to do online. So I think you have to, that's where you have to look at that question. How should they respond versus how will they respond? And I think that how will they respond will be based on the economics, because people forget that they are profit-making organizations, right? They make money. They're out there to make money, right? So.
Well, yeah. we are a not-for-profit organization.
Well, we manage money, right? We have to, cover our costs, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good point from David, but also we have the issue of actually online has offered greater equity and access to people, and I think we're going to teach in a hybrid model going forward, especially while lectures exist. That's not going to go away because it's enabled more people to access more learning, and that's a good thing. So I don't see that that's going to stop in the future. So we may go back to the classroom, but I suspect we're going to share those lectures online. And I think we need to shift how we teach, though, because just recording what happens in the classroom is not effective. You need to teach for the medium. So we need to start to think about how we're going to teach and how we shift our teaching.
I think what David brought up and what Kate was mentioning is really interesting, right? And putting on my technopreneur hat, right? I would say, well, okay, then I could have differentiated cost fees, right? You want to come to class? Sure, you pay a premium. If you want to do it online, you pay less. Every dollar earned is still a dollar more for the university, right? So I think what would happen, and if the universities are a bit more business minded in terms of dollars, maybe they'll think of something like this: offer a differentiated experience at a differentiated price point, so that you maximize the lecturer's time when he's delivering a class.
Yeah, interesting perspectives. And I'm also hearing from a lot of universities, I think to your point, Kate, that, those big lectures and big lecture halls that would be filled with just a couple, filled to the brim on the, first day of each semester, but then sort of, never to be filled again for the rest of the semester. Maybe that's the piece that will go, and that people like the flexibility of, how they receive that information when it's more of a, a one message out to a group of people. But those, on campus sort of interactions, will probably shift to be more that sort of high collaboration, problem solving, sort of collaborative interactions that makes more sense for people to actually, be face to face for. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. There's another query from the audience. Do you think the quality of student assessments has increased with the distance learning approach? It'd be great to hear your thoughts on that. Anyone?
You want me to go first?
First, yes.
We had a short discussion on this, right? Yes, we were engaging one university that actually asked us, how can AI be used to make sure that there's no cheating happening, especially for tests and especially for exams. And well, some exams you can work on a project and submit that. Some they still say, well, they still need to spend 2 hours without a book or with a book and answer questions. And how do we check that? How do we make sure that there's no cheating happening? Well, there are various AI systems being done today. But my question back to them was, in today's day and age, where as a professional that's working, if I do not know something, I will Google. And then I will apply what I find and intentionally apply what I find online. So do we still want to test our students that way? That whole method of remembering and regurgitating out, is it still the best way to test whether they actually learn something? Or should we go, project style or some other ways of testing them? and then we get rid of that 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours exam structure, and hopefully lead to more innovation in teaching.
Yeah, it's been interesting to watch, right? So my courses, it was easy because I never actually had any exams in my master's level courses, right? They were all doing group projects and written assignments and that kind of thing. So that's why I say my course was easy to transfer online. What I watched across all the universities is when COVID hammered them, right? First thing they did was stop doing the final assessments, or at least they reduced that kind of need for a final exam. And then they started moving to these technologies like Proctor and that basically use AI and use machine vision to watch people as they're writing their exams, which a lot of the students rejected or didn't like because it's intrusive, right? You're basically taking a video of someone's home and watching them, and they just felt it was very uncomfortable. So I think people are, the assessment process, the universities are still figuring it out, I think. Because they are very cautious. I mean, one of the reasons why I think in undergraduate courses, they've traditionally always had like big, massive final exams that were worth a large percentage of the mark, was to reduce that issue of cheating, right? And so how do you manage that in an online environment, right? So yeah, I don't think they've got it worked out yet, and I think they've been trying different things, and I think it's going to take a while to figure it out.
Oh yeah, totally. And we're doing a lot of thinking as across our entire institution about how we can reimagine assessments. And I personally am a student as well as a lecturer, so I'm on both sides of this fence, and I find those really coercive technologies like Proctor to be a real intrusion. And, I think institutions that are going down that path are going down a very stupid and wrong path. But we have degrees that lead to qualifications where people get certified. So, you want your civil engineer to be properly able to build a bridge so that it doesn't fall down. You want them to be properly educated. So that is the real tension. So I think we have to reimagine it. And we're doing some proofs of concept and some pilots at the moment that are quite interesting and that don't involve those sort of coercive approaches that I see as so wrong-headed about some of those products.
Thanks for that. Another question we have from the audience, and I can certainly relate to this one from Tanya, who's sort of talking about, the differences and the challenges with, this dealing with this situation with education on both sides, from a teacher's perspective and a student's perspective. And she writes that a 5th grade child is very frustrated, and so decided that for the younger 2nd grade child to not even sort of connect to Zoom. And so and the question is, what would you suggest to parents regarding their children and to parents around this sort of online education? And I think, there's a lot of us who've been in that situation, Tanya, and particularly those who are working, as well as having, children asking and young children who not necessarily at that stage of being able to have that kind of, self-guided, experience with education yet. They still need a lot of help. How do you help them? And to me, actually, it leans a little bit to just also issues of people maybe with learning difficulties or disabilities. And how they've sort of coped in this time and what that has delivered. So just interested in the panel's thoughts on those things.
Well, I can comment on that as a parent. I think it's a real struggle because I think the reality of it is, I think, for university students, because they're older and they're professionals, it's a different kettle of fish. But for the sort of kindergarten to year 12, at least in Australia, the parents unfortunately are going to have to be more engaged, right? That was just a byproduct of it. They had to take on, more engagement in working with their kids, right? Because the reality is they were sitting on this side of a computer screen, and someone had to work with them. So I think in the short term, parents just have to become more engaged. It's a challenge because, we all work and we all have all these balances we have to do. But that, for the high school and for the grade school, it's definitely just more engagement, I think.
Yeah. Kate, Laurence, any thoughts on that?
Oh, I guess I'm one of the lucky ones. My kid is Dad, why are you in my room? Can you please get out? So as a teenager, he's not going to need my help. But yeah. So unfortunately for the younger ones, the parents' involvement or adult involvement is totally critical in helping them use the technology and make sure that they are properly able to follow what's happening. So I don't really have experience much in that, since my son is way past that age. Yeah.
So I think certainly from my perspective, it was really a challenge, and it leads a little bit into another question here, which asks about of teaching. How do you think technology will be used to gauge and nurture student mental health and well-being? And I think there's a direct link there, because it's certainly created a lot more stress in my household. But I think ongoing, there's also been a lot of studies that have revealed that for students actually to be able to learn, there needs to be that baseline level of mental health and personal security. And so I believe there's a role for technology to play there. What's the view of the panel?
Go ahead, Laurence.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess because of this pandemic, a lot of people basically created, converted what they had, the materials that was done in classroom online, and just had to run with that. But previously in Revolution Analytics, this was about 7 or 8 years ago, we were talking to companies that were trying to put materials online. And one of the nice things about students interacting with an online system is that you can actually track their performance and how they're interacting with the performance. And you could actually have a baseline of the cohort's expected performance. And you could really track on a daily basis whether a student is performing to expectations or not. And one of the useful, I guess, outcome or feature of that is that we could then know that if a student is not performing, for the teacher to intervene early. That means, is there some problem at home? Why, we notice that, you are not completing your assignments as quickly, or your grades have dropped. Nearly on a daily or weekly basis, if the teacher has the time, rather than today, it's done on a quarterly basis through, a test every other month or so. So with online system, this is one of the things that actually can be done. I think a lot of online education providers are moving into that direction, adding this sort of analytics in to provide that additional feedback, not necessarily to the students, but to the parents and to the teachers. So I think this will happen over the next year or two, as people start to add this in after they've gotten all the materials converted online.
Yeah, my own personal experience has been an interesting one on this one, from two perspectives. 2-3 years ago, I can remember the department heads sending us notes as lecturers saying, by the way, you're 4 weeks into term, you need to make sure that you're following up on all your students and that they're engaged and they're not disappearing. And I think to myself, okay, yeah, I'm looking at a sea of hundreds of students. How am I supposed to do that, right? So it was very, very hard under the old model to try and measure that level of engagement. I think Laurence is right. The technology enables it now. We've got all this data. We can, even now I can go into the learning management systems and tell you how long a student has been looking at a particular piece of content, which content they're looking at and that kind of thing. I think the challenge for the unis, and I think all the unis are working on this now, at least I know UNSW and UCIT is to take that data and do something useful with it. So they have the information, they have the ability to do something with it, but I think it's going to take a little while before they're really doing something effectively and broad-based across all their programs of study. But they'll get there.
Yeah, we are doing it in pockets, and the challenge is that part of the problem we've got, the COVID response, has been everybody chose their favourite technology and they've use that for their teaching. So instead of having all of our teaching consolidated on one platform where we can run analytics across everything, we've got all of these pockets of it. So over time, I think we will consolidate onto a single platform. That's the future I'm detecting. I think we'll consolidate onto a single platform, and then we'll be able to run analytics. And I can see that we will be providing their feedback to the students, because students now are kind of different to students from the past. They really do like feedback, and they want to know how they're going. They want to know how they're going against their peers, as well as how they're going on their own. So I can see that a real hunger for how am I going, and we can automate that now.
Mm.
We can automate caring.
And I think that's a great segue into, there's actually two last questions from the audience that we hadn't got to, and I'm going to somewhat combine them together. The first one is, could each panelist give us an overview of what their ideal education setup post-COVID looks like? And I think you touched on some aspects a little bit there, Kate. But the other question, which I think could lead into this, is also, you know, how do you think the universities can make their physical campus and facilities valuable to those online students who never actually go onto campus? And so maybe sort of, you know, combine those and think about what the ideal education setup is, and, you know, that, you know, I guess that value of the online versus campus piece. And if we can just go through each panelist for that, and that will be our last question.
Okay, I guess I'll start first. I read a recent article that in the commercial sector, people are now re-looking at redesigning the office space to have the fact that, you know, people are going to work in this hybrid mode. So I think that idea could translate into the universities, where you will still have the auditoriums for those time that you need, but the tutorial rooms, maybe rather than just having a whiteboard or blackboard with all the chairs at the back, it could be reconfigured into something where people come together in a semi-formal setting for discussions and so on and so forth, right? Or maybe even, you know, I guess you can't really remove that in Singapore. It's just too hot. You need to go into the aircon room. But, you know, in Australia, where the weather is nice, you could have a bit more of those, you know, in the parks, where people could actually come and discuss the lesson rather than just talk cricket, right? Yeah.
Thanks, Lauren. Kate or David?
I'll go next. So I'm kind of thinking that we're going to see a convergence. We're going to see a continued hybrid model. It's not going to go away. We've always had this tension with the off-campus students, the distance education students. I've been a distance education student for years now, and, you know, I always gripe at having to pay the student services fee for campuses I never go to. So, you know, I understand that. But I see that we're going to, what's going to be the big shift is the vice chancellors will stop counting the cranes. So I've been over at University of Sydney walking along with University of Sydney and University of New South Wales vice chancellors, and they're counting each other's cranes, because whoever's got more cranes is obviously doing better. And that is kind of a mental metric, a mental map for how well a university is doing will need to shift. And when they've shifted away from the cranes as the metaphor, that's when things will start to change. And that'll take all of the rest of us working to develop new models for that to filter up to shift their mental models. And that's how the things are going to change. I think that we're only at the start of the journey for things like AR and VR. So, you know, they're things that we haven't even started really using in an educational context, where it's the very, very first steps of the journey. And they will probably revolutionise things in really interesting ways over the next decade.
Thanks, Kate. David?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Kate's comments about the counting cranes and the perceptions and the old school views of perhaps a lot of the VCs. The challenge I see it is this, right? even if you're not an educator, we've all been in business meetings or meetings in general, where you've had, say, 5 or 10 people in the meeting room and then one person on the phone, right? And it's a really bad experience for that one person on the phone, right? And this is the challenge, I think, that, you know, the first challenge is coming to grips with online, but the next challenge is going to be, what is hybrid? How do you do hybrid? I think Laurence touched on that, right? How do you have a hybrid classroom? It's not going to be a lecture hall anymore. It might be more interactive studios, because I know that they came to me 2 months ago and said at University of Sydney, oh, we're going to move back to in-person classes, but we want to do it hybrid. Can you prepare for that? And I thought, yeah, I don't know how. How am I going to do it if I have students doing breakout activities and there's 6 students in a workshop, but half the students are online and half the students are there physically with me, right? What's that experience going to be, right? Because I think the experience is not going to be good for, you know, both sets, you know what I mean? So I do think people are going to have to figure out what that means from a hybrid perspective. And perhaps if they're not counting cranes, but they're probably going to have to go back and re-engineer the physical premises, as Laurence was saying, to make them more useful for a hybrid model, right? So it's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah, it's true. All right, well, look, I want to be respectful of time, and so I want to take the opportunity now to say a sincere thank you to our panelists. I think this has been a really interesting discussion, and thank you to the audience as well for all of the questions and all the chat and engagement online. And also a big thank you to Shiva and Nadia for organising and pulling this event together. So with that, Nadia, Shiva, did you want to wrap up the call?
Sure. So thank you all for joining. Thank you again to Tiffany, Kate, Laurence and David for joining us today. As we did mention in the beginning, this session has been recorded, so we'll upload it to our YouTube channel and I'll post it in the meetup page as well for all of you guys to re-watch. So thank you all again and have a great night, and we will see you all next time. Bye for now.
Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks.